It was 3 a.m. when the storm sirens blared across our sleepy town. I had faced storms before, but nothing like this. The sky was a boiling, angry shade of gray, lightning slicing across it like a jagged knife. Rain pounded against the windows, deafening, relentless, as if the sky itself wanted to punish us. My neighbors' houses creaked and groaned under the weight of the wind, some even disappearing under the wrath of nature. But somehow, against every odds, my house stood firm. Solid. Unyielding. The eye of the hurricane passed, leaving devastation in its wake, but my home, my sanctuary, was untouched. As dawn broke, the town was unrecognizable. Trees lay shattered across streets, roofs were ripped from homes like paper, and debris floated in chaotic rivers down avenues. I stepped outside, still in shock, feeling guilty for surviving when so many around me had suffered loss. My relief was immediate, but it didn't last long. By the second day, the whispers started. First, subtle glances, murmurs in the supermarket, then, the emails. The HOA. I opened one with a sinking feeling. Due to the structural integrity of your home surviving the hurricane unscathed, we have reason to believe you engaged in activities that caused or influenced the storm. We demand $10 million in restitution. I blinked. I reread the email. My hands shook. Surely this was a joke, some twisted prank, but the HOA's logo stared back at me, official, terrifyingly real. They claimed my house's survival was unnatural, that somehow, I had manipulated the elements or the weather itself. Panic and confusion collided in my mind. Was this absurdity even legal? Could a homeowners association truly accuse me of causing a hurricane? Over the next few hours, I received more notices, each escalating in anger and absurdity. One claimed my house had interfered with natural disaster progression, another insisted I benefited unfairly at the expense of neighboring properties. I couldn't comprehend it. My neighbors, those I had watched endure the storm, were now terrified I would be taken to court. Rumors began spreading that the HOA had a history of harassment, but this was beyond anything imaginable. I spent the night pacing my living room, thinking about what I had done to deserve this nothing. My house had survived, and suddenly, that was a crime. I realized I needed a plan, but first, I needed proof that their claims were baseless. I grabbed my camera and notebook, determined to document every detail of my home, the storm, and the aftermath. I was ready to fight, but little did I know, the battle ahead would test everything: my patience, my sanity, and even my sense of reality. The next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with more than just bills. There were letters, thick envelopes stamped with the HOA's official seal, each one more aggressive than the last. My heart sank as I read the first one aloud. Your refusal to comply with restitution demands is noted. Failure to pay $10 million will result in immediate legal action. Your neighbors are concerned about the imbalance your home has caused. I had no idea how a community of homeowners could collectively decide that one house surviving a hurricane warranted millions of dollars in payment, but apparently, they had. I showed the letters to my spouse, hoping for a calm second opinion. But even they looked shocked, their brow furrowed as they whispered, "This is insane. They're accusing you of causing a hurricane." It sounded like something from a dark comedy, yet the threat was real. Fear began creeping in. Legal action? Lawsuits? Thousands of dollars in attorney fees, maybe more? How could they possibly claim responsibility for a natural disaster? And yet, these letters weren't just empty threats. They carried signatures, official HOA stamps, and a tone that implied they were serious. By the afternoon, the local news had picked up on the story. A few neighbors approached, some curious, others wary. One older woman, whose house had lost half its roof, whispered, "They think your house survived because of you." I nodded numbly, unable to form words. The absurdity of it all was staggering. I wanted to scream, "I didn't do anything," but I knew that wouldn't make a difference. Evidence mattered more than emotion. Determined, I began compiling photos, videos, and eyewitness accounts of the hurricane's path. I reached out to meteorologists, storm experts, and structural engineers. I needed proof not just for myself, but for anyone who might one day read these insane claims and think they had merit. The HOA, however, didn't wait. Their letters kept coming, escalating with each day. One even included a detailed analysis of my property, claiming that my house's orientation, construction materials, and even the landscaping had somehow manipulated the wind and rain. My jaw dropped. How could any of this be remotely believable? Still, panic lingered in the back of my mind. The HOA's aggressive stance made it clear, they weren't just asking, they were threatening. As I scanned yet another envelope, my fingers trembling, I realized that survival wasn't enough. My house had endured the storm, but I wasn't safe yet. Someone, somewhere, had decided that I was guilty of something impossible. And now, I had to prove it. By the third week after the hurricane, my life had become a strange mix of paranoia and obsession. Every knock on the door, every ring of the phone, made my heart race. I kept expecting the HOA to show up in person, clipboard in hand, ready to accuse me of manipulating nature itself. It was absurd but terrifyingly real. Their letters had become a daily ritual, each one more aggressive than the last, filled with legal jargon and veiled threats. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I began researching attorneys with experience in property disputes and HOA conflicts, reading reviews, and scheduling consultations. Most were incredulous when I explained the situation. "They're accusing you of causing a hurricane," one lawyer asked, incredulous. I nodded, suppressing the urge to laugh and cry simultaneously. Yet the absurdity didn't diminish the stakes. A lawsuit demanding $10 million could ruin us financially and emotionally if it went unchecked. I realized I had to fight not just for my house, but for my sanity. Meanwhile, the HOA didn't relent. Notices arrived with alarming frequency, some delivered by certified mail requiring signatures. Each one referenced negligence or interference with natural disaster progression. One particularly audacious letter even implied I had somehow harnessed atmospheric forces to favor my property. I kept the letters in a separate binder, labeling them meticulously. They would serve as both evidence and a record of their escalating harassment. I also began documenting my neighbors' reactions. Some avoided me, wary of being caught in the HOA's crossfire. Others offered sympathy but clearly feared retaliation. It was surreal. The community that had once felt safe now seemed like a stage for psychological warfare. The hurricane had ended, but a storm of another kind was just beginning. To strengthen my case, I contacted structural engineers and meteorologists to analyze my home and the hurricane's path. Their reports were clear: nothing about my house or its location influenced the storm. The hurricane's impact was random, and my home's survival was a combination of construction quality and luck. I saved every report, every email, and every video as evidence. Yet the looming threat of court remained. I spent sleepless nights strategizing, imagining scenarios of confrontation, cross-examinations, and courtroom theatrics. The HOA wasn't just an organization, they had become my adversary, relentless and irrational. But I knew one thing: if I let fear dictate my actions, I had already lost. Preparation, documentation, and resilience were my weapons. It was a gray Tuesday morning when the first official court documents arrived. The envelope bore the HOA's insignia, and my stomach dropped as I tore it open. Inside was a summons: they had filed a lawsuit demanding $10 million in damages. My heart raced. My house had survived a hurricane, and now I was being accused of causing it. The words seemed to blur on the page, yet the threat was undeniable. This was no longer a battle fought with letters and threats, it was legal, binding, and terrifyingly real. I called my attorney immediately. The conversation was a mixture of disbelief and strategy. "This is extreme," she said. "I've seen HOA disputes before, but never anything like this. They're alleging weather manipulation. We need to build a strong, irrefutable case." We discussed gathering experts, compiling all meteorological reports, photographs, eyewitness accounts, and any proof that my house's survival was purely coincidental. Evidence, not emotion, would be our shield. The next few days blurred into chaos. I spent hours with engineers and meteorologists, drilling them for detailed statements, technical explanations, and graphs demonstrating the storm's path. I even recorded walkthroughs of my property, showing its construction, orientation, and surroundings. Every detail mattered. Meanwhile, the HOA's communications grew more absurd. One email claimed my garden's orientation redirected wind currents, while another accused me of interfering with nature's balance. Each message was more comical than the last, but underneath the humor was a terrifying undercurrent of aggression. Neighbors began taking sides. Some sympathized, offering meals and moral support. Others whispered about retaliation, afraid of being dragged into the HOA's drama. It felt like the town had transformed into a battlefield. The local news caught wind of the story, framing it as a bizarre HOA feud gone too far. While the coverage brought attention, it also increased pressure, making me hyper-aware of every action and every word spoken in public. I spent nights pacing, imagining the courtroom drama, attorneys glaring across the table, my property photos projected on a screen, the judge's expression unreadable. Could anyone truly comprehend the absurdity of being sued for surviving a hurricane? But I had to channel fear into focus. My survival, my home, and my peace of mind depended on it. As the filing deadlines approached, I realized the fight was only beginning. The HOA had taken an ordinary storm and turned it into a personal vendetta. And now, every decision I made would be scrutinized under the law, every action measured against an accusation that defied reality. I knew one thing: I couldn't back down. The morning of the first court hearing arrived like a storm of its own. My attorney and I walked into the courthouse, hearts pounding, papers clutched tightly. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and nervous energy, and the murmur of spectators filled the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that this day would set the tone for everything to come. The judge, a stern woman with a sharp gaze, entered and called the session to order. The HOA's attorney stood first, a confident, aggressive figure who wasted no time outlining their case. "Your Honor," he began, "my clients are victims of a property that survived under suspicious circumstances, causing a disparity in our neighborhood and potentially influencing storm patterns." A hush fell over the courtroom. I blinked, trying to comprehend the words. Storm patterns. Disparity. How could anyone claim responsibility for nature itself? Yet there it was, in black and white, presented as if it were fact. My attorney countered methodically, presenting the evidence we had meticulously compiled. Structural reports, meteorological analyses, videos of the storm's path, photographs of damage to neighboring homes. Every piece reinforced the absurdity of the HOA's claims. She explained that my home's survival was entirely consistent with standard construction and pure chance, highlighting the randomness inherent in natural disasters. Slowly, the tension in the room shifted. The judge leaned forward, reviewing documents, her expression unreadable but clearly skeptical of the HOA's argument. As the hearing progressed, unexpected twists emerged. The HOA had attempted to introduce expert testimony from a self-proclaimed storm analyst who claimed that my landscaping and construction somehow altered wind currents. My attorney objected, citing lack of credibility and scientific basis. The judge agreed, striking the testimony from the record. Relief surged through me, though I knew this was only the beginning. The HOA's relentless pursuit hadn't stopped, it had merely stumbled for now. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed us. Neighbors approached cautiously, some offering support, others clearly curious about the absurd claims. I felt a mix of vindication and apprehension, While the hearing went better than expected, the real battle was far from over. I realized that the HOA's obsession wasn't logical, it was personal. Each letter, each demand, each court filing was a tactic designed to intimidate and exhaust me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the day's events, and I felt a spark of determination. They could threaten, accuse, and intimidate all they wanted, but I had facts, evidence, and resilience on my side. Survival had brought me this fight, but survival would also guide me through it. After the first court hearing, it became clear that the HOA wasn't going to back down. They were shifting tactics. If legal arguments weren't enough to intimidate me, they would try public pressure. Flyers appeared in my mailbox, social media posts circulated in neighborhood groups, and whispered warnings spread like wildfire. I had survived a hurricane, only to find myself under siege by the very community I had trusted. One morning, a neighbor approached cautiously at the grocery store. "People are saying, you somehow caused the storm," she whispered, glancing around nervously. My heart sank. The absurdity of it all had seeped into reality. Rumor and fear were working alongside the HOA's intimidation. I realized the fight was no longer just legal, it had become social, a test of reputation and endurance. Determined not to be bullied, I began documenting everything. I took screenshots of social media posts, collected flyers, and even recorded conversations with neighbors who had been approached by HOA representatives. My attorney advised me to remain calm and professional, emphasizing that public harassment could be countered with evidence and, if necessary, legal action for defamation. It was exhausting work, but I knew this was part of the battle. Meanwhile, the HOA doubled down in court. They filed additional motions, claiming emotional distress caused by my house's survival. Their language grew increasingly bizarre, accusations of imbalance to neighborhood energy and manipulation of natural forces littered their filings. I read them in disbelief. How could anyone take these claims seriously? And yet, the court required attention to every filing, no matter how ridiculous. I reached out to experts again, ensuring my meteorological and structural reports were airtight. Engineers provided detailed diagrams showing wind and water patterns, proving my home had survived due to construction standards and sheer luck. Experts confirmed that no property could influence a hurricane's path, no matter how strategically placed. Armed with irrefutable proof, I felt more confident, though the looming tension in my neighborhood persisted. The emotional toll weighed heavily. I avoided casual encounters, drove cautiously past neighbors' homes, and felt like my life had been hijacked by a legal nightmare. But there was a small comfort: every step I took, every report I collected, reinforced the truth. The HOA's campaign of fear and social pressure was intimidating, but not undefeatable. By the end of the week, I realized that survival alone wasn't enough. I had to fight with strategy, patience, and proof. Nature had spared my house, now it was up to me to ensure the law and reason prevailed. Just when I thought the battle had reached its peak of absurdity, a shocking twist emerged. During routine discovery in the court case, my attorney uncovered emails and internal HOA communications that revealed a startling truth. Their actions weren't driven by storm-related concerns or neighborhood fairness. They had a hidden motive, and it wasn't public safety. My jaw dropped as we scrolled through messages filled with frustration, envy, and personal grudges. It turned out that a few influential HOA board members had been trying to manipulate property values for years. My house, newly renovated and storm-resistant, had survived where others had suffered damage, highlighting their own failures to maintain their properties. In their eyes, my survival had become a symbol of inequality, a challenge to their authority. The $10 million lawsuit, the public harassment, and the bizarre claims about influencing storms were all tactics to intimidate me and force a financial settlement. The revelation ignited a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just attacking a house, they were attacking me personally. And now that we knew the real motive, we could expose it. My attorney advised compiling all the evidence, emails, meeting notes, and recorded statements from neighbors. Each piece would show the HOA's intent, shifting the focus from absurdity to malice. Meanwhile, the social campaign continued. Flyers painted me as a reckless homeowner who had somehow disrupted neighborhood harmony. I had neighbors asking me questions, some hesitant, others curious. But armed with this new insight, I approached each encounter with calm, documenting interactions and making sure the narrative stayed factual. I realized public perception could be as powerful as court filings. If I could sway the community, the HOA's influence would weaken. At home, the tension was palpable. Every morning, I reviewed emails, double-checked evidence, and strategized with my attorney. My family tried to maintain normalcy, but the stress was unavoidable. The storm may have ended weeks ago, yet the psychological hurricane had no end in sight. But the discovery of the HOA's motive gave me an edge. Knowledge was power, and I intended to use it. I also began reaching out to journalists and bloggers, quietly sharing proof of the HOA's hidden agenda. The more exposure we gained, the harder it would be for them to continue their harassment unchecked. Their attacks, once shrouded in mystery and absurdity, were now vulnerable to scrutiny. The fight was no longer just about surviving the hurricane or legal filings, it was about exposing corruption, defending truth, and reclaiming control over my life. And yet, I knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The day of the courtroom showdown finally arrived. I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as I stepped into the room, evidence binder in hand. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, news cameras had been allowed in, and neighbors filled the seats. The HOA's attorney sat confidently at the front, unaware that their carefully constructed plan was about to unravel. I could feel the weight of every observer's gaze, but also a surge of resolve. The hearing began with the HOA's attorney presenting their case as usual, dramatic statements about storm manipulation, neighborhood imbalance, and imaginary harm caused by the home's survival. For a moment, it seemed like the old pattern: absurdity and intimidation. But then, my attorney stood, her tone calm and commanding. She unveiled the emails and internal communications we had discovered, revealing the true motive behind the lawsuit. The room fell silent as board members squirmed. Evidence after evidence painted a clear picture: envy, personal grudges, and attempts to manipulate property values. Every public accusation they had made claims of weather manipulation, harm to neighbors, and even interference with natural forces was exposed as a smokescreen to mask their selfish intentions. The judge reviewed the documents, occasionally raising her eyebrows at the audacity of the HOA's plan. Even their expert witnesses seemed rattled when presented with the internal emails showing deliberate deception. As the hearing progressed, the momentum shifted dramatically. My attorney called on engineers and meteorologists to explain, in simple terms, why my house's survival was entirely based on construction quality and chance. The courtroom watched as diagrams, videos, and storm simulations proved there was no supernatural or unnatural influence involved. My defense wasn't just logical, it was undeniable. The HOA's case began to crumble under scrutiny. Neighbors in attendance whispered, their doubts turning into recognition. Many approached me afterward, apologetic and supportive, acknowledging that they had been manipulated by the HOA's fear campaign. Social media chatter shifted as news outlets reported on the revelations. The HOA, once a terrifying force, was now exposed for what it truly was: a group using intimidation and false claims for personal gain. By the end of the day, the judge indicated that the HOA's case had no credible basis and would likely be dismissed. Relief washed over me, but there was still a lingering tension. I had survived the hurricane, endured harassment, and fought a relentless legal battle, but the final judgment had yet to be officially announced. The fight was almost over, but the victory was on the horizon.